Hello everyone, this is Ike and welcome to the 4th episode of These Verse. Today we'll be starting in we'll be starting in Mark chapter 7 verses 17 to 23. Now, usually I would read the verse and break down the interpretation of the verse right after I read it. But for today's lesson, for today's These Verse, I'm going to read the verse first, and I'm going to give you the understanding of what the verse is actually talking about, because the verse that we're actually starting with today have been used to twist and to manipulate people into believing that they can... Well, let me read the verse first before I get into all of that. But you already see where I'm going with this. Mark chapter 7, starting at verse 17 to 23, and it reads, it says, "When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples answered him concerning the parable. So he said to them, Are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods?" Now you see where we're going with this. Verse 20. "And he said, What comes out of a man that defiles a man? For from within, out of the heart of man, proceeds evil thoughts, adultery, fornication, murder, theft, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man." Now, the verse I've just read is a verse that is used in the church to teach the people that they can eat unclean foods now. Whenever you try to teach someone that it is a sin according to God's laws to eat unclean foods, which are the beasts that do not chew, that do not have parted hoofs and chew the cud, the sea creatures that does not have fins and scales, and certain birds of prey we can't eat. You know, all this is laid down for us in the law about what's clean and unclean, what we can eat, what we can't eat. But the church has taken Mark chapter 7 verses 17 to 23. They'll read these verses to you to make you think that you can eat anything you want. That this is actually talking about unclean foods. But that's the reason that I have made this verse the topic of discussion today. These verse, the topic of discussion today. Because these verses that I just read to you has nothing to do with unclean animals becoming clean. It is not saying that you can eat unclean things. And every single pastor, every single Sunday church, most of them Sunday church pastors that's preaching this garbage. Those who keep the Sabbath, like let's say the Seventh-day Adventists, and let's say the Messianic Hebrew Israelites, or even the Jewish congregations, they don't eat unclean foods because they know the law. But the Christian church don't know the law. So when they read verses like this, because they lust to sin against the Most High anyway, they use verses and misinterpret them so they can do what they want to do, which is sin. So let's go to the beginning of this chapter to get an understanding of what this is even talking about. Now we're in Mark chapter 7, starting at verse 1. And we're going to read from verse 1 all the way down to verse 23, so you can get the entire, complete understanding of what this is talking about in the context that it was used in. Because see, the unskilled, wicked pastors of today that's out here teaching y'all lies and garbage, they'll take a verse that has nothing to do with the topic at hand, use that verse to make you think that it's relating to whatever the question may be. Like you could say, hey, Pastor, somebody told me that eating pork is a sin, that it's against God's commandments. And then he'll just go to Mark chapter 7 and read verse 18 to you. And he'll say, are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from without cannot defile him? See, they read that one verse to you, and they're supposed to talk about that, and they think that's referring to pork. Meaning anything that goes into you does not defile a man. See, they twist in the scriptures. They apply in scriptures where it does not belong as far as certain topics are concerned. When it comes to the topic of eating unclean foods, you don't go to no Mark chapter 7, verses 18 and 19, or this whole thing that's listed today to try to tell somebody they can eat unclean foods. I prove that we're not supposed to eating unclean foods, and I go to New Testament verses to prove that. And I might do that today in this lesson. I only have 30 minutes, and I'm not trying to be that long on this one here. So let me go ahead, and we're going to read Mark chapter 7 from verse 1 all the way to verse 23 to get the full context of what the conversation is about and why the Messiah stated his reply in verses 17 and 23. So let's get it cracking. Mark chapter 7, beginning at verse 1, and it reads, it says, then the Pharisees and some of the scribes came together to him, having come from Jerusalem. Now then, they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands. They found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. When they came from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pottery, vessels, and couches. Verse 5. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples do not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? Verse 6. He answered and said to them, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, you hold fast the traditions of men, the washing of potteries and cups, and many other things which you do. He also said to them, all too well you reject the commandments of God, that you may keep your traditions. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profits you may have received from me is korb, that is a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, and many such things you do. When he had called all the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the things which come out of a man, those are the things that defile a man. That's verse 15. I should have started with verse 15. Verse 16. If anyone has ears, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. Verse 17. When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from without cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods? And he said, what comes out of a man that defiles a man? For from within, out of the heart of men, proceeds evil thoughts, adultery, fornication, murder, theft, covetousness, nakedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within a man and defile him. Now, Christ is simply saying, see, the Pharisees, see, chapter 7, starting at verse 1, all the way down to verse 5. The Pharisees and the scribes meet up with Christ. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. They meet up with Christ. And Christ's disciples begin to eat their bread, begin to eat their food with unwashed hands. They didn't wash their hands before they eat, which is also a tradition that has been passed down to some of us. You know, some of us will handle the tradition from our parents that we cannot eat our food unless we wash our hands. We can't sit at the table and eat unless we wash our hands. Well, this was a tradition that the scribes and the Pharisees had handed down to the children of Israel. There is no commandment that says you must wash your hands before you eat, but they made this tradition as though it was like a law from God. So they're questioning the disciple about why does your apostles, why does your disciples eat their bread with unwashed hands? And let's read verse 2 again in chapter 7 of Mark. It says, now when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the traditions of the elders. See, this was a tradition that was passed down from the elders. This is not a law and commandment from God. This was a tradition from the elders. And it says, now when they saw the disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. So they saw you not washing your hands as you having defiled hands. That if your hands are dirty, your hands are defiled. So if you were eating something with unwashed hands, which they deemed as defiled hands, whatever you ate was made defiled by your hands not being washed. You get it? Whatever you ate was defiled by your hands not being washed. So when you ate food with dirty hands, they saw that as you were defiling yourself because you're eating food with unwashed hands. That's what this whole conversation is about. It's about their perception of you eating food with unwashed hands. They felt that you were defiling yourself by not holding the traditions of the elders, which were to wash your hands before you eat. And that's why in verse 5 it says, then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? This whole conversation is about his disciples eating their bread with unwashed hands. That's why Christ responds in verses 6 to verse 23, rebuking the Pharisees and the scribes as being hypocrites, because they have put these traditions over the commandments of God. So let's pick it up from verse 6. He says, he answered and said to them, well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of potteries and cups, and many other such things you do. See, this is Christ telling them this. Verse 9, he said to them, all too well, you reject the commandments of God, that you may keep your traditions. You reject the commandments of God. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not lie. You should not eat unclean foods. That's also a commandment of God. It may not be on the top 10 list of the commandments of God, but we know, those who actually study the scriptures know that there are 613 commandments of God in the Bible, in the Torah. And those first 5 books of Moses, Genesis is a book of Moses, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, these are the books of Moses which contain the laws of God. So if you don't know the laws of God, you need to go read them to learn what God said we are supposed to do and what we are not supposed to do. Now we do know that Christ did away with the sacrificial system. All the sacrifice and stuff was done away with. We no longer sacrifice the animals for the remission of sins. If we no longer exercise the sacrificing of sinners who commit certain sins that God said they shall surely be put to death, which Christ is about to elaborate on when we pick back up at verse 10. And it reads, it says, for Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you may have received from me is corrupt, that is, a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother. Now let me pause it, because a lot of people have a little confusion on verse 11 and 12. Okay, Christ is saying the law says that you're supposed to honor your father and your mother. And the law also says that he who curses his father or mother, let him be put to death. He says, but you, talking about the Pharisees, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you may have received from me is a gift to God. Meaning, this son may go out, work, and bring home the profits of his labor to his parents, which helps out the family. You know, you stay with your parents, you gotta help pay the bills, help, support their household. Well, this son would bring home the profits to his family to share to his parents, but then he'll go to the Pharisees and they would say, okay, where's your tithe and offering? No, we need this much today. And he'll say, well, I gave that to my parents, to help them out. And he'll say, no, we need that to be a gift from God. You need to go get that from them and bring that to us as a gift to God. And he says, so that's kind of like, that's like cursing your family, because you're taking away something you have given them to give to the church when that was supposed to be used to help them. And you're supposed to honor your mother and your father. You don't take something that you've given to them, take it from them to go give it to the priest and stuff. That's breaking the commandment. You're supposed to honor your mother and father. So that's what he's saying. He says in verse 11 and 12, he says, but you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God. Whatever this profit was that I gave you, it was a gift from God. No, it was a gift to God. So he takes it back. Then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother. That's verse 12. Making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, and many such things you do. So he's saying these traditions that y'all done made up, all these traditions that y'all done came up with, y'all are actually causing the people to sin against God. They may hold your traditions over the commandments of God. Then he goes, and remember, they was asking him, questioning him, the Messiah who came to sit down with them and fellowship with them and teach them and enlighten them about the word of God. They found fault because they saw his disciples eating bread with unwashed hands, and they brought this to him as an issue. Like, hey, hold up, brother. We came to sit down with you to understand what this doctrine is that you're teaching. But hey, your disciples are eating bread with unwashed hands. And so in their mind, through their traditions, they thought that if you ate food with unwashed hands, you were defiling yourself because your hands were unclean. See, that's the whole topic of this conversation. And that's why Christ says in verse 15, there is nothing that enters a man from without which can defile him. But the things which come out of a man, those are the things that defile a man. It says, if anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. Now we go jump to verse 17 through 23, which is the topic of these verses. When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from without cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods? And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceeds evil thoughts, adultery, fornication, murder, theft, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. So what he's saying is this. If you eat, because the whole conversation is about them eating food with unwashed hands. So what he's saying is, whatever goes into a man does not defile a man, because it goes into his stomach and is purified and comes out. Let me read that verse. Verse 15. Therefore is nothing that enters a man from without which can defile him. But the things which comes out of a man, those are the things that defile a man. Verse 18. So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? To his disciples. Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from without cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods? So in verse 18 and 19, he said, if you eat, basically what he's saying, because of the Pharisees and the scribes, who were the teachers of the people. See, Christ was coming temporarily. He came to bring the new covenant and came to break down certain things that was being misinterpreted and misunderstood and was not being kept by his people. So while he was there with them, and the scribes and Pharisees had this tradition about washing hands, and in their mind they thought if you ate food with unwashed hands that you was defiling yourself. He's breaking it down to them in verse 18 and 19, saying, do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from without cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods? Meaning, if you eat food with unwashed hands, it goes into your stomach and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods. Meaning, if I eat food with dirt on my hands, yes, the dirt will get on the food and go into my body, into my stomach. But there's a system within my body that separates the things that my body can't process, the things that my body don't need, and that stuff is eliminated. The stuff that my body does need is stores and uses for, to keep this body healthy and going. So he's saying whatever enters a man does not defile a man, because it goes into the stomach and is thus eliminated. He's talking about eating food with unwashed hands. Eating food with dirty hands. Dirt get on the food, goes into your body. He's saying it goes to the stomach, and whatever that the body does not need is eliminated, thus purifying all food. Your body can take out the things that your body don't need that's in the food and eliminate it through your bowels. That's what he's saying. That's what this whole thing is about. He's disputing with the scribes and Pharisees, calling them hypocrites, because they're holding these traditions over the commandments of the Most High. Now, let's get a precept, because this same story about this conversation here with the Pharisees is also in the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 15. In Matthew chapter 15, starting at verse 1 through 20, it reads, it says, Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, saying, Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. He answered and said to them, Why do you also transgress the commandments of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God, then he needs not to honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandments of God of no effect by your tradition. Verse 7, hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth, and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, Hear and understand. Hear and understand. Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out the mouth. This defiles a man. Then his disciples came and said to him, Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? But he answered and said, Every plant which the heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. He says, verse 14, Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. Then Peter answered and said to him, Explain this parable to us. Because, this parable had offended them when he said, Whatever goes to man does not defile a man. But he also said that you are hypocrites because you could reject the commandments of God to hold your traditions. So Peter says in verse 15, Explain this parable to us. Verse 16. Now this is Matthew chapter 15. Now we're going into verses 16 through 20. So Yeshua said, and I'm saying Yeshua in the place of Jesus. We know that there were no J's in the Hebrew language. We know that the Messiah name was not Jesus. His name was Yeshua. Or Yahweh to some Hebrews. So Yeshua said, Or are you also still without understanding? Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth comes from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemies. Verse 20. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. See, he's interpreting. He's breaking it down to them. The understanding of him saying what goes into a man does not defile him, but what comes out of the man defiles the man. He is talking about eating food with unwashed hands. He is not talking about eating unclean foods such as pork, shrimp, catfish, lobster, oysters, all these unclean foods that people eat. Catfish, rat, dog, cat. People eat this stuff in other countries. Verse 20. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands, does not defile a man. This This is what Mark chapter 7 is talking about. This is what Matthew chapter 15 verses 1 through 20 is talking about. It's talking about eating food with unwashed hands. That does not defile you. It is not talking about eating unclean foods. It's talking about eating food with unwashed